My name is Rachel Harmon. I'm 31 years old, and I'm a licensed CPA. On September 4th, 2024, at 7:22 inches the morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was a nurse at St. David's Medical Center in Austin, Texas. She told me my grandmother, 81 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighing 103 pounds, had been admitted to the emergency room the night before with severe dehydration, a urinary tract infection that had spread to her kidneys, and a blood sugar level of 387. Dangerously high. She told me my grandmother had been brought in by a neighbor who found her sitting on the front steps of my brother's house at 11 o'clock at night, confused, in her nightgown, calling out for someone named Harold. Harold was my grandfather. He died 6 years ago. The nurse asked me if I could come in. She said my grandmother had been asking for Rachel since she regained enough clarity to speak. She hadn't asked for my brother. She hadn't asked for my sister-in-law. She asked for me. I was in my car before she finished the sentence. What my brother and sister-in-law thought was a quiet, invisible arrangement, one that had been running smoothly for almost 2 years, ended that morning. They just didn't know it yet. They didn't know that I'd been keeping a private folder on my laptop for 4 months. They didn't know that a CPA's most dangerous skill isn't finding money. It's finding where money disappeared to. And they absolutely didn't know that before I walked into that hospital room, I had already called the Adult Protective Services hotline in Travis County and left a 14-minute voicemail. Let me take you back to how we got here. Because it didn't start with a hospital. It started with a birthday cake. My grandmother's name is Dorothy Harmon. Everyone who loves her calls her Grandma. She turned 80 inches July of 2023. And my brother, his name is Derek, he's 38, works in commercial real estate, threw her a party at his house in the Buda suburb south of Austin. My sister-in-law, Kristen, decorated the backyard. There were balloons, a catered tray of sandwiches, a sheet cake with pink roses. About 20 people came. Aunts, cousins, a few of Grandma.'s old friends from her church choir. I flew in from Denver, where I'd been living for 3 years. I work remotely for a mid-size accounting firm, so my schedule is flexible, but the distance made regular visits hard. I hadn't seen Grandma. In person since Christmas. She looked thinner than I remembered. Not alarmingly so, she'd always been small, but her face was different. Tired in a way that sleep didn't explain. Her hands shook more than they used to when she held her cup of sweet tea. I noticed these things and filed them away the way you do when you're not sure if you're seeing something real or just the passage of time on someone you love. My brother gave a toast. He talked about how lucky the family was that Grandma. Had agreed to move in with him and Kristen after her diagnosis in early 2023. Early-stage Alzheimer's, her doctor had said. Manageable. She still knew everyone, still held full conversations, still had days that were completely clear. But she needed someone nearby. She couldn't live alone anymore. Derek said, and I remember this, because I wrote it in my journal that night. He said, "Family takes care of family. That's what we do." Everyone clapped. Grandma. Smiled and patted his hand. I smiled too. I believed him. That was my first mistake. The second time I noticed something was Thanksgiving 2023. I drove down from Denver instead of flying because I'd planned to stay a week. I arrived on the Wednesday afternoon before the holiday. Derek and Kristen both worked during the day, so when I let myself in with the spare key they'd given me, the house was quiet. I found Grandma. In her room. She was sitting in the small armchair by the window, still in her pajamas at 3 inches the afternoon, eating a sleeve of crackers. The room smelled stale. There was a glass of water on her nightstand that looked like it had been sitting there since the morning. I asked her if she'd had lunch. She looked at me with that careful expression she gets when she's not entirely sure of something. "I think Kristen left something in the refrigerator," she said. I wasn't very hungry. I went to the kitchen. In the refrigerator was a single container of leftover pasta, 3 days old by the sell-by sticker. I checked the pantry. Mostly empty, except for crackers, a jar of peanut butter, and some canned soup that had expired in 2022. I made her a proper meal from what I could find. She ate 2 full servings. That night, after Derek and Kristen came home, and dinner was over, and everyone was being normal and warm and fine, I sat in the guest room and wrote down what I'd seen. I wasn't sure yet if it was neglect or just a bad day. But I wrote it down. Old habit. Accountants document everything. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I helped Grandma Dot set up automatic notifications on her bank account. It was something I did for all my older clients, a simple alert to a trusted email address whenever a transaction over $50 cleared. I set the notification email to go to both her address and mine, with her full permission and understanding. She thought it was a wonderful idea. She held my hand and told me I was so smart, just like my grandfather. I flew back to Denver and didn't think much more about it until February 11th, 2024. I was finishing a client audit at 9 at night when the email notification came through. Transaction alert. Dorothy Harmon checking account. Amount, $2,400. Payee, Harmon Home Care LLC. I didn't know what Harmon Home Care LLC was. I checked the previous alerts I'd been half ignoring for 2 months. There it was, same amount, same payee, every single month since December. $2,400 to Harmon Home Care LLC. I searched the Texas Secretary of State Business Registry. Harmon Home Care LLC was registered on November 28, 2023, 1 week after Thanksgiving. The registered agent was Kristen Harmon. My sister-in-law had created a fake home care company in my grandmother's last name and was billing it to my grandmother's checking account every month. I closed my laptop, sat very still for about 3 minutes, then opened it again and started a new spreadsheet. I titled it Grandma Concerns. I added the date, the amount, the payee, the LLC registration date, and Kristen's name as registered agent. Then I searched further back in the transaction alerts I'd been ignoring. November, $1,800 to Harmon Home Care LLC. The LLC didn't even officially exist yet when that charge went through. October, $1,800, same payee. They'd been billing her before the business was legally formed. I called my brother the next morning. I kept my voice completely neutral. Hey, I just had a question about Grandma Dot's care expenses. I see some monthly charges to something called Harmon Home Care. Can you walk me through what that covers? There was a pause. Just her regular care stuff, he said. Medications, supplies, you know. What kind of supplies? Rachel, it's handled. We manage her finances now. She gave us permission. You don't need to worry about it. Okay, I said. I just wanted to make sure everything was being properly documented for tax purposes. He relaxed. Oh yeah, totally. It's all accounted for. I hung up and added a new line to my spreadsheet. Brother confirmed awareness of Harmon Home Care LLC charges. I didn't tell him I'd already looked up the business registration. I didn't tell him I was going to pull 18 months of transaction history. I just said, okay, and let him believe I'd moved on. An accountant who tells you what she found is an accountant. An accountant who stays quiet and keeps finding things is dangerous. I decided to be dangerous. I requested 6 months of paper statements from her bank, which I could do because she'd added me as an authorized contact on the account 2 years prior, back when her diagnosis was first confirmed. I told the bank it was for estate planning purposes. That was completely true. The statements arrived at my Denver apartment on February 20th. I sat down with a red pen, a legal pad, and coffee, and I went through every single line. In addition to the Harmon Home Care charges totaling $14,400 over 6 months, I found 3 checks written to Derek Harmon personally. Each one was for $3,000. The memo line on all 3 said the same thing: loan repayment. My grandmother didn't make loans. I had handled her finances informally for years before Derek took over. She didn't believe in lending money to family. She'd told me once that money and family were a combination she'd watched destroy 3 marriages in her church circle, and she wanted no part of it. I photographed the checks, compared the signatures to older checks I'd scanned from 2021, back when I used to help her pay bills during my visits. The handwriting was similar enough to pass a casual glance. But the pressure was different. Grandma Dot wrote with a heavy, confident hand. These signatures were lighter, more careful, like someone copying rather than signing. I called her primary care physician, Dr. Linda Okafor, who I'd spoken with once before when Grandma Dot's Alzheimer's diagnosis was first given. I introduced myself as her granddaughter and asked if Dr. Okafor could tell me when her last appointment was. I haven't seen Dorothy since May, Dr. Okafor said. Her last 3 scheduled appointments were canceled. The calls came from a family member who said she was having a difficult week and they'd reschedule. They never did. My grandmother with early-stage Alzheimer's, a diabetic, had not seen her doctor in 4 months. I asked Dr. Okafor to note in the chart that there were potential concerns about care continuity. She didn't ask me to elaborate. Her tone told me she already had concerns of her own. I was still building the case when September 4th happened, and the hospital called me, and everything moved from quiet documentation into emergency. I walked into her room at David's Medical Center at 8:47 that morning. She was in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm and monitors beeping softly. She was small, so small, but her eyes were open, and when she saw me, she reached out both hands, the way she used to when I was little, and she'd open the front door, and I'd come running up the porch steps. "Rachel," she said. "You came." "Of course I came," I told her. "I'm right here." She was confused in the way that Alzheimer's plus dehydration, plus a bad infection creates. She thought it was 2019 for part of our conversation, thought Harold was just at the store. But underneath the confusion, she was present enough to tell me that she hadn't been feeling well for a long time, that she'd been very thirsty, that sometimes dinner didn't come, and she didn't want to bother anyone, that she'd gone outside the night before, because she thought she heard Harold's car. I held her hand and kept my voice soft, and even the way you do when you are sitting next to someone fragile and you are furious at people who are not in the room. The ER doctor, a man named Dr. Vasquez, pulled me into the hallway. He told me her A1C was at 10.4, her diabetes had been severely uncontrolled for months, she was acutely dehydrated. The UTI had escalated to a kidney infection because it had gone untreated long enough to spread. She had a pressure wound on her lower left hip early stage, but clearly developing over weeks of prolonged sitting or lying without repositioning. And she weighed 103 pounds. Her chart from Dr. Okafor's office 18 months ago had her at 119. 16 pounds in 18 months, I said. He looked at me carefully. In a patient with her conditions, yes. That's significant. Are you her primary caregiver? No. She lives with my brother and his wife. He nodded slowly. I'm going to have the hospital's social worker come speak with you. This presentation is something we're required to flag. I told him I had already called Adult Protective Services that morning. He looked relieved in the way that people look relieved when a problem they've identified turns out to already be in someone else's capable hands. I went back to Grandma Dot and sat with her until she fell asleep. Then I went to the waiting room, opened my laptop, and spent 2 hours adding to the spreadsheet I'd been building for 4 months. Every transaction, every date, every amount, every canceled appointment, every notation I'd written down since Thanksgiving 2023. I added last night's hospital admission. I added her current weight and the ER doctor's observations, dated and timed. I added the pressure wound description, the infection, the A1C. By the time I finished, the document was 31 pages. My phone buzzed. It was my brother. Hey. I just got a call from the hospital. What's going on? Why are you there? I took a breath. Come to the hospital, Derek. We need to talk. He and Kristen arrived 45 minutes later. He was in a button-down and khakis, looking like he'd come from the office. Kristen had her hair pulled back and was carrying an iced coffee. They looked completely normal. That bothered me more than anything. We sat in a family consultation room off the main hall. I waited until they were seated. Then I put my laptop on the table between us and turned the screen toward them. I've been reviewing Grandma Dot's bank statements since February, I said. I need you to explain. Harmon Home Care LLC. Kristen's expression didn't change immediately. It was very controlled, that first second. Then she looked at my brother. Derek cleared his throat. That's for her care expenses. Medications? In-home support. There is no in-home support, I said. I've spoken with Dr. Okafor. Grandma Dot hasn't seen a physician in 4 months. Her A1C is 10.4. She has a kidney infection and a pressure wound, and she weighs 103 pounds. What exactly is the $2,400 a month covering? It's Rachel. Managing an elderly person's care is expensive. We haven't charged ourselves for our time. I opened to the check copies. What are these 3 checks to you personally, Derek? Totaling $9,000? The memo says loan repayment. She doesn't make loans. Those were she offered. She wanted to help me with the Riverside property deal that fell through. I'm a CPA. I have her financial records going back 3 years. She made no loans. These signatures don't match her earlier checks either. That landed. Kristen looked away. My brother's jaw tightened. Look, he started. I'm not finished. I have a case number from Adult Protective Services. They are sending an investigator. I want you to understand that right now, today, before anyone from APS or the police arrives, because I want to give you the opportunity to understand what is coming. This is not a family disagreement. This is a financial exploitation case, possibly a criminal one. My sister-in-law set down her iced coffee. You can't do this to us. You live in Denver. You have no idea what it's like day to day. I know what 103 pounds looks like, I said. I know what a blood sugar of 387 looks like. I know what a stage 1 pressure wound looks like on a woman who should have had a home health aide coming in 3 times a week, paid for by the $14,000 you took from her. I know all of those things because I'm sitting 30 feet from her hospital room right now. The room was quiet for a long time. Then my brother said, and I recorded this because Texas is a one-party consent state, and I had pressed record on my phone before they walked in, he said. We were going to pay it back. Things got tight with the property deal. We were going to pay it back when things turned around. I ended the meeting, saved the recording, walked them out, and went back to Grandma Dot's room. That afternoon, an APS investigator named Marcus Webb arrived at the hospital. He was methodical, thorough, and kind. He sat with Grandma Dot for 45 minutes. I was present for her comfort, silent unless asked, and she told him, in her own words, that she had not been aware of any home care company in her name, that she did not remember signing checks to Derek, and that she remembered having much more money a year ago and being confused about where it had gone. She remembered being confused. She just couldn't fight through the fog to get to the truth. That's what Alzheimer's does. It doesn't remove awareness. It just removes the ability to act on it. Marcus Webb examined my documentation for over an hour. At the end, he looked up from my 31-page spreadsheet and said, Miss Harmon, this is one of the most organized intake packages I've seen from a family member. I want you to know, this will be prioritized. I thanked him. He gave me case number TR20244417. Before he left, I asked him, will there be criminal charges? He said that the financial exploitation documentation, combined with the medical evidence of neglect, would be referred to the Travis County District Attorney's Office, Elder Abuse Unit, and that forged signatures on financial instruments in Texas constituted felony fraud under Texas Penal Code Section 32.21. That was not up to him. But that's what the referral was for. For the next week, I stayed in Austin. I slept on an air mattress in Grandma Dot's hospital room. The first 2 nights the nurses brought me a pillow, without being asked, and then at a hotel nearby, after she was stable enough that I could leave her floor, without panicking, I hired an elder law attorney named Patricia Sung, who came recommended by the hospital's social work team. She had 22 years of experience and a reputation in Travis County that apparently preceded her significantly, because when I mentioned her name to Marcus Webb, he simply said, "Good choice." Patricia reviewed everything in one sitting. She didn't speak for the first 40 minutes. When she looked up, she said, "We're filing for emergency guardianship this week." We also filed a civil claim against Harmon Home Care LLC, seeking full recovery of the $14,400 in fraudulent charges. Patricia filed a motion to freeze the LLC's business account, which still had $4,200 in it pending resolution. She filed a separate civil action to recover the $9,000 in forged checks. Additionally, she filed a cease and desist ordering Derek and Kristen to have no contact with Grandma Dot without my explicit written permission as her appointed temporary guardian, which the court granted within 72 hours of filing. That Friday, a process server delivered the cease and desist to my brother's house at 2:15 inches the afternoon. By 5:30, they were at the hospital. I got the call from the nurse's station. I was in the parking garage. I walked back in and met them in the hallway, outside Grandma Dot's room. I did not let them in. Kristen was crying. "This is insane, Rachel. You're destroying our lives over a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said. "The LLC was registered in her name without her knowledge. The checks have forged signatures. The doctor hasn't seen her in 4 months. None of that is a misunderstanding." My brother stepped forward. His voice dropped low in a way that was meant to be intimidating. "You need to drop this. We're family." "She's family too," I said. "And she weighs 103 pounds. His face changed. "Not regret something harder. You were never here. You have no idea what the last 2 years were like. You're right that I wasn't here enough. That's something I have to live with. But I'm here now." Kristen grabbed his arm. "They know about the checks, Derek. They know about the LLC. Stop." He shook her off. I saved recordings of this entire interaction, which lasted 19 minutes. In those 19 minutes, my brother denied wrongdoing 3 times, implied that Grandma Dot had been difficult to manage, referenced her Alzheimer's diagnosis as a reason the financial arrangements were complicated and hard to explain, and twice asked me directly what it would take to make this go away. Each time he asked, I said the same thing. "I can't make this go away." I didn't start it. They left. I stood in the hallway for a moment, then walked back into Grandma Dot's room. She was awake. She looked at me with clear eyes, one of her clear day moments. "Was that Derek?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She was quiet. Then she said, "I always knew something wasn't right. I just couldn't. I couldn't get the words in order." I sat on the edge of her bed and held her hand. "I know," I said. "That's okay. I got the words in order for you." The guardianship hearing was scheduled for October 14th at the Travis County Courthouse, Judge Maria Delgado presiding. 14 years on the bench, family court specialty. My brother hired an attorney. His name was filed with the court. Patricia reviewed his response brief and told me it was thin. They were claiming the financial transfers were consensual gifts documented through informal verbal agreements, and that Dorothy Harmon's care needs had been fully met within the family's capacity. Dr. Okafor submitted a written statement. Her nursing home's consulting geriatric specialist, a Dr. Raymond Hall, had conducted a formal assessment of Grandma Dot during her hospital stay and submitted a 12-page report. Key finding: the pressure wound was consistent with 4 to 6 weeks of inadequate repositioning. The weight loss was consistent with caloric restriction and inadequate hydration over a period of 6 to 12 months. The uncontrolled diabetes was consistent with irregular medication administration. In Dr. Hall's professional opinion, the neglect had been ongoing and was not consistent with caregiver overwhelm. It was consistent with deprioritization of the patient's needs. The morning of the hearing, I arrived 45 minutes early. Grandma Dot was well enough to attend. Her infection had cleared. Her blood sugar was controlled. She was up to 106 pounds and climbing. She sat beside me in the courtroom in a soft blue cardigan. She held my hand. My brother and Kristen sat on the other side of the room. Kristen didn't look at me once. Derek looked at me once, for about 2 seconds, and then looked away. Judge Delgado reviewed the case file for 10 minutes in silence after both attorneys had made their opening statements. Then she put down her reading glasses and looked at the room. I've reviewed the APS substantiation report, the medical assessment, the financial documentation, and the forensic analysis of the disputed signatures. She looked at my brother. Mr. Harmon, your response brief argues that your grandmother's financial contributions were consensual. The forensic document examiner retained by the court has concluded, with a high degree of confidence, that 2 of the 3 checks in question do not reflect Mrs. Dorothy Harmon's authentic signature. Can your attorney explain that? His attorney stood. Your Honor, given my client's grandmother's Alzheimer's diagnosis, inconsistency in signature characteristics is. The forensic examiner accounted for motor degradation consistent with her diagnosis, the judge said flatly. The inconsistencies are not consistent with motor degradation. They're consistent with someone else writing her name. She moved on. She looked at Kristen. Mrs. Harmon, you are the registered agent of Harmon Home Care LLC. Can you describe for me the specific services this company provided to Dorothy Harmon between October 2023 and September 2024? Kristen's attorney spoke. Your Honor, my client. I'm asking your client, Judge Delgado said. Kristen's voice was barely audible. We provided daily care, meals, medication management. I have Dr. Linda Okafor's sworn statement that Dorothy Harmon missed 4 consecutive medical appointments and that her diabetes management was critically inadequate over this period. I have a hospital admission report showing severe dehydration and a stage 1 pressure wound. I have medical documentation of a 16-pound weight loss. Judge Delgado set down the paper. This is not a difficult case factually. This is a difficult case emotionally. But the law doesn't weigh those differently. She looked at the room and her voice didn't change in volume, but something in it settled like a judgment being rendered, was always exactly this weight. Dorothy Harmon was placed in the care of family members who, rather than providing that care, extracted financial resources from her through means that this court finds were not legitimately authorized, while simultaneously failing to provide adequate medical care, nutrition, or supervision. The consequence of that failure was a preventable hospitalization that could have been life-threatening in a woman of her age and condition. She looked at me. Rachel Harmon, you identified this situation, documented it methodically, sought appropriate professional help, and did so in a manner that demonstrates both professional competence and genuine care for your grandmother's well-being. This court takes note of that. She looked back at my brother. This court does not take note of the defense's characterization of these events as a family misunderstanding. There is nothing ambiguous about a forged signature. There is nothing ambiguous about a blood sugar of 387. There is nothing ambiguous about a woman found outside her home at 11 at night, calling for a husband who has been dead for 6 years. The gavel came down. Emergency guardianship converted to permanent guardianship. Rachel Harmon is hereby appointed sole legal guardian of Dorothy Harmon. Derek Harmon and Kristen Harmon are permanently barred from unsupervised contact. The LLC freeze is maintained pending civil proceedings. This case is formally referred to the Travis County District Attorney's Office, Elder Abuse and Financial Exploitation Unit. We are adjourned. Kristen made a sound I won't describe. My brother sat stone still. I walked out of that courtroom, holding my grandmother's hand, and she looked up at me in the bright October sunlight outside the courthouse steps and said, "Did we win?" "Yes," I told her. "We won." She patted my arm. "Good," she said. "I want a cheeseburger." I took her to get a cheeseburger. 6 weeks after the hearing, the DA's office called Patricia. They were proceeding with charges: forgery of a financial instrument felony, financial exploitation of an elderly person felony, injury to an elderly person through criminal neglect felony. 3 counts total, 2 defendants. Derek and Kristen were each charged. My brother called me the night the charges were filed. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was flat, in a way I hadn't heard before. All the performance was gone. He said, "I know you won't believe me, but things got really bad. The Riverside deal put us underwater and I panicked. I should have called you. I should have done a lot of things differently. I'm sorry." I saved the voicemail. I added it to the evidence folder, which was now 47 pages. Then I went and made Grandma her nightly cup of chamomile tea, which she likes with exactly half a spoon of honey. And we watched 2 episodes of her favorite British baking competition, and she fell asleep in her armchair, and I sat there for a long time in the quiet, and thought about the word sorry, and what it costs and what it doesn't fix. His business license was suspended pending the criminal case. Kristen resigned from the school district administrative position she'd held for 9 years. I learned from a cousin that the HR department had been notified of the charges. The Harmon Home Care LLC was formally dissolved. The court ordered full restitution as a condition of any plea arrangement. $14,400 in fraudulent care fees, $9,000 in forged checks, plus Grandma Dot's medical bills from the September hospitalization, which came to $22,000 that insurance only partially covered. $45,000. That's the total restitution figure. The civil case settled 6 months later. My brother and sister-in-law liquidated part of their home equity to pay it. I put every dollar into a restricted trust for Grandma Dot's care, the Dorothy Harmon Care and Dignity Trust, managed through Patricia's office. I am the trustee. I am not the beneficiary. The trust covers her medical care, her housing, her physical therapy, and whatever else makes her life good. She lives with me now. I moved back to Austin. I work remotely, always have, so it was a choice I could make, and I made it without hesitation. She has the bedroom with the window that faces the backyard, where I planted a garden in November, because she told me she used to grow tomatoes with my grandfather, and she missed having her hands in dirt. The first time a tomato came in this past spring, small, a little lopsided, deeply red. She picked it right off the vine and ate it standing in the garden, with dirt on her fingers, and said, "Harold would have loved this." I cried after she went inside. Just for a minute. Then I went back in and made dinner. Her Alzheimer's has not reversed, it doesn't reverse, but with consistent medication, proper nutrition, regular doctor's appointments, a daily routine, and people around her who are paying attention, her decline has slowed to a pace her neurologist describes as slower than the median curve. She knows who I am every single day. She knows what year it is most days. She tells the same 3 stories about my grandfather on a rotating cycle, and I love every single one of them every single time. She takes a watercolor class on Tuesday mornings at the senior center 4 blocks from our house. She made a friend there named Gloria, who also has a grandson named Derek, and Grandma told me once, very quietly, that she didn't tell Gloria what that name means to her now. She just lets it be a name. That, I think, is grace. And it is hers to give or not give, on her own terms, in her own time. My brother is awaiting trial. He entered a not guilty plea, which his attorney has since walked back toward a plea negotiation. The DA told Patricia they expect a plea agreement before summer. Kristen took a separate deal that included community service and probation. Their house went on the market in February. I don't hate my brother. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier to hate him, and this story doesn't have the shape of a story where I hate him. I think he got into financial trouble, looked around for the easiest solution, and found it in a woman who couldn't protect herself. I think he told himself it was temporary, that he'd pay it back, that the care was fine. I think he believed his own justifications for long enough that the justifications became load-bearing walls. And then the walls came down. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't set up those bank alerts at Thanksgiving. If I hadn't driven down instead of flying. If I'd looked at that transaction in February and thought, surely there's an explanation, and moved on. A neighbor found my grandmother sitting outside at 11 at night in her nightgown, calling for a dead man. That's what the other timeline looks like. This is a story about documentation. It's a story about paying attention. It's a story about a woman who had enough left in her, enough spark, Enough self to ask for me by name. From a hospital bed. She asked for me. So I came. Some things are that simple. And they are also the hardest things in the world. If you are watching this, and you have an elderly parent, or grandparent, or aunt or uncle living with someone else, set up the bank alerts. Make the extra phone call. Drive down instead of flying. Trust the thing that feels wrong before you have the proof to back it up. Documentation is only possible when you're paying attention. And attention is the first form of protection. Grandma Dot is in the garden right now. I can see her from where I'm sitting. She has dirt on both hands, and she is completely happy. That happiness is the whole point of all of this. Everything else, the spreadsheet, the APS report, the 47 pages, the courtroom, the charges. All of it was just the work of getting here. Here, where she is safe. Here, where she is known. Here, where someone will always come when she calls.